This week, conflict zone is in New York,
Berlin,
Kiev, Leipzig,
Hamburg,
Brussels, Potsdam.
Brexit, the euro crisis, disagreement about refugees. Are we witnessing the last days of the European Union?
I don't believe it are the last days of the European Union, but it are maybe the last days of this European Union.
The English are the ones who will feel the damage most. It's almost as if he wants the British to suffer as a result of this.
There is no revenge or lesson-giving sentiment. It is clear that, I mean, we fully respect the choice of the Brits. We need now to focus on what needs to be done among 27, and notably within the Eurozone, and the new investment policy to boost growth.
But it would be very good for you if the British suffered, wouldn't it?
No.
Because
why?
What if they make a go of it? What if their economy grows? What if their employment grows? What if all the economic indicators turn green? How are you going to persuade your citizens here, who are labouring with 11.5% unemployment, that it's worth staying in the EU? That makes your job that much harder, doesn't it?
My job is a very difficult one. The job of any...
But a British success would make it even more difficult.
I wish all the success to the Brits. I do not believe that it's the right choice. I fully respect the British choice. I think that it is a deeply wrong choice. And I think that in the medium run, Britain will suffer from that and will regret it.
A lot of apocalyptic warnings in the last few days about what Brexit will mean. Even you said before the referendum, we're looking into the precipice. Is the EU so fragile?
Yes, it is. Since a couple of years, we cannot deny the fact that there are clear tendencies of dissolution. We have tendencies of renationalization in many countries.
Germany's Deputy Chancellor, Sigmar Gabriel, warned just days ago that unless the British exit from the EU was handled properly, the European Union, he said, would go down the drain. It's that fragile that you'll go down the drain if you get this wrong.
I think that the Union is going through a very delicate phase. I think that the Union cannot afford to remain in the status quo. And I think that the status quo could be the beginning of European disintegration, whereas what we need is to relaunch on a new basis the European integration process. This is why immediately we have to give answer, proper answer, efficient answer, on growth, security and youth, and next year we have to think of a new political pact for the Union, for a ever closer Union.
But these are not new tablets. You're not saying anything new that hasn't been said. Hasn't been said for years.
You don't need to be original. You just need to implement what we say.
What they want to do is to make a split between these three freedoms and the freedom of movement of people. And we shall never accept that. The unity of the four freedoms for all citizens is a key element in this.
If somebody is negotiating and saying we will never accept that, so where are the negotiations?
No, we will never accept to undo the European Union. You cannot expect that if the British people, or a majority of the British people, want to go out of the European Union, that we shall destroy the European Union. I have to defend the interests of the European citizens. But I have to defend the interests of the German citizens, the Belgian citizens, who want to keep the European Union because it's in their advantage,
yes, but
this European Union.
Talk about
it's their work, it's their job.
You think there's a clear danger the European Union will not survive?
Yes, absolutely.
That other countries will leave?
Yes. Yes, I can give you the candidates. I mean, the Netherlands,
Italy,
Austria.
That's the reason why I want to change and reform Europe. This Europe cannot work because member states have mainly all the power.
You want
and
to
if
change.
They don't, and the change is that we need a real European government. What we don't have for the moment. That doesn't mean a commission
so
of
let's
28.
talk about now.
And that means change the European Parliament.
UKIP, Front National, Alternative for Germany. Doesn't the growth of national movements show that the idea of the EU is failing?
No, it's a test for the idea. We have to give answers to the questions. There are uncertainty of people because of internal and external security, consequences of globalization, that part of our society feel that they will fall down in the workers' class and in the middle classes, partly, where the voters come both in Brexit as in Le Pen and AfD. It's mostly the same type of voters like it is in Trump.
Competence and failures of the EU offer excellent service to any populist who wants to promote anti-democratic and right-wing things.
How I can contradict you? It's the reality. But the reality it's very good that you say, yeah, this situation, this European Union that doesn't work creates...
Are you responsible for the rise of all these populist groups? Yes or no? Who is responsible?
A European Union that doesn't work very well creates automatically populism and nationalism.
So there is a responsibility, yes or no?
So the only way to react to this is not to fall into the trap of nationalism and populism, but is to reform the European Union the fastest as possible. That is what I'm saying. I'm saying that the only way to fight against nationalism and populism is to reform the European Union. And if you don't do it, we're going to see in every member state of the European Union, in France, in the Netherlands, in every member state, a rise of nationalism and populism. And we have the duty to tell to the public opinion, if you don't, if this European Union doesn't work, don't fall in the trap of nationalism and populism, but reform the Union.
In a few months, there are elections in France, and Le Pen is today one of the favorites. What will this have for consequences if, after the Brexit, France will be led by a president, Madame Le Pen, who is right-wing, who is a racist party and an anti-European party?
If a country like France would go in such a direction, it would be a disaster for France and all of Europe.
What means a disaster for Europe and France?
It means to going to the past, to going back to nationalism. It means that the old anti-feelings of nations will increase again, and that we go back to that time before the war, that Europeans fight each other and not to try.
Which means it would be the end of the European Union.
I believe so, that a country like France would do that. It would be a major threat in such a direction.
You said the day after the election of Donald Trump that you gave him credit for saying he'd try to bind the wounds of division and be the president for all Americans, which is what they all say, I guess. How is anybody supposed to ever believe a word Donald Trump says after the kind of campaign we've seen?
Well, you don't have to believe everything, you just have to see what's going to happen. I think that's really the question anyway. You know, look, with every presidential candidate, there's always that moment when presidential campaign rhetoric has to turn into presidential policy, and that's, I think, what we're all waiting to see.
But this is a campaign that ran on lies, didn't it? And it ran on quite significant lies, in particular the one that sought to delegitimize America's first black president, saying that he hadn't actually been born in the US when it was quite clear that he had. This went on for years. This is serious lying, isn't it?
Well, this has been a very, very, very divisive campaign, and my advice is that he's got to take steps to rebuild the center. He's right to criticize Washington over its partisanship and inability to forge compromises.
He was right to run a racist campaign.
He's a deal maker, and let's see now if he can make some deals in Washington.
He ran a racist campaign, General.
Jim, I'm nonpartisan.
I understand that. I understand that. But I'm asking you how you work.
The campaign is over, Tim.
But this wasn't a campaign. This is the man, isn't it? The man ran a racist campaign. How do you get over that?
When Mr. Trump will be the President of the United States, what is your opinion about that?
This has to see whether then the Western Alliance has still the full credibility, that the United States sticks to its values.
Is Mr. Trump credible?
In my opinion, no. He has not the credibility, but he has a chance to prove it.
I'm not going to get into characterizations of this candidate or that candidate. Let's see what President Trump does. Let's see who President-elect Trump picks for his cabinet officials. let's see what policies begin to emerge.
So it doesn't shock you that 60
interested in.
million Americans voted for someone who had lied so comprehensively to them during the campaign. What does that say?
Well, let me tell you what,
Americans?
actually, let me tell you what the election says, and that is that the Washington elite, if you will, the elite of the coasts, New York and LA, have lost touch with an awful lot of America, the so-called flyover zones, the heartland. And that's what came out and voted in droves. That is what had legitimate concerns that were tapped into by a campaign that was very, very effective. Look,
and the
again,
60 million Americans don't care that they were lied to comprehensively during the course of the campaign.
You'll have to ask the 60 million
But you're not
Americans.
shocked by that? And what you see in the United States is one of the presidential candidates, Donald Trump, who says NATO is obsolete and is costing us a fortune. And he's accused Washington's NATO allies of ripping off the US and says either they pay up for past deficiencies or they have to get out. And if it breaks up NATO, it breaks up NATO. This man could be president-elect in less than a week's time. And this is a fundamental challenge to NATO's core existence that you have to deal with.
I'm absolutely certain that the United States will understand that also in the future a strong NATO is not only in the interest of
You're certain
Europe,
on the basis of what?
but also
What Donald Trump is saying?
also in the interest of the United States. I will not be part of the US election campaign, but what I can say is...
You won't even stand up for NATO?
No,
It's under
but
attack?
if you don't interrupt me, I'm able to finish my sentence, because what I can say is what matters for NATO, and that is that we are defending each other, that our security guarantees are not conditioned, they are absolute. We don't say that we only protect you if you pay. We defend and protect all allies without any conditions. Okay. But then, of course, I would like NATO allies to invest more in defense, and that's exactly what they have started to do, and I welcome that.
Are you worried that NATO is not going to survive Trump's presidency?
I'm not worried about that. What I am worried about is that the cooperation and the working together that has characterized this alliance, which is so important now, given various threats around the world, that could be eroded. Now, let me say, by the way, once again, he has been on to something that is legitimate. Secretary Gates, in his final session with the North Atlantic Council, I was there as the commander of the forces in Afghanistan, said to all of them, you are not paying your fair share. You're not meeting the 2% of GDP threshold in your defense spending. Now, that has improved a bit in recent years because of some of the threats that are emerging in various places. But this coalition matters. It's a cornerstone of American security policy. It's a cornerstone of the Western world's security policy. So again, I'm hopeful that the element of his comments that is correct, that others need to do more, that they need to bear more of the burden, that they will step up to that. And indeed, we can forge a continued cooperative effort as we go forward.
You have said the European military coalition is indispensable for the security of our citizens and will be the start of a real foreign and defense community in Europe. Yeah. This means a European army, doesn't it?
Exactly, yeah, we are working on that, yeah.
Doesn't NATO guarantee European defense?
Yeah, but it's not in contradiction. NATO is a cooperation transatlantic, and it's clear that we need a stronger European defense community inside NATO, because the Americans, and Mr. Obama have said it in Hanover a few months ago, said very clearly that there are limits to what the American army will do in Europe. And what he said is the Europeans have to take their own responsibility in the neighborhood.
As they said in the Warsaw Summit, July, earlier this year, Russia has breached the values, principles and commitments which underpin the NATO-Russia relationship, broken the trust at the core of our cooperation and challenged the fundamental principles of the global and Euro-Atlantic security architecture. That's why...
I read this language, of course. This is language very familiar to me. But at the same time, what we face now, this is a huge deviation from all the principles we agreed before. This is the basic principle of indivisibility of security. What we face now, that there are two levels of security. NATO says that only NATO could really guarantee security and defense of the member states, and that means that this all-European project is not in place now.
They're not saying that. They're saying the ongoing illegal and illegitimate annexation of Crimea, which NATO does not and will not recognize, and which they call on Russia to reverse. They're calling on Russia to reverse it. That's what they say. They're asking for predictability and transparency.
People in Crimea made their choice, and that's it, full stop.
I think that also we need a number of sanctions in the case of the Syrian question, because this cannot continue what Russia is doing.
Sanctions against Russia over Ukraine were useless. Nothing changed then. Why would it be now?
I don't agree with you. It's an attempt to push and to put pressure on Putin to apply the Minsk agreement. That is what we are trying to do in the east of Ukraine. And if we don't continue on that line, if we are not tough against Putin, what he's going to do is to take, not only the east of Ukraine, the whole of Ukraine.
Isn't it?
But the view from the outside world is rather different, because Biden said very angrily, and he warned your president in the strongest possible terms, he needs to start living up to the promises of economic and political reforms, or risk seeing the EU countries, and he spoke about 5 countries, ready to walk away from sanctions on Moscow if you don't live up to these.
No, not at all. let's not mess it around, because I was in the last meeting between our president and Joe Biden.
Where he said straighten up and fly right, didn't he? He said straighten up and fly right.
Sanctions is about Russia waging the war, the hybrid war against Ukraine, having occupied Crimea and having actually occupied Donbass. And sanctions are here about to get Russia out of Ukraine.
You are concerned about Russia. You have talked about the dangerous whims of Vladimir Putin, but Putin has managed to find
moreover,
friends.
I'm on the black list of Vladimir Putin. It's more than that.
Okay, so whatever, but there are friends in the European Union, Budapest, Athens. What can you do about that?
No, I think there is a very clear stance and a unity of view in Europe towards the threat of Vladimir Putin. And that doesn't mean that we have to be anti-Russia. I think that we have to intensify our relationship with the Russians to give, for example...
You have relationship with governments. I mean, don't be naive.
No,
what are you talking?
No, I don't agree with you. You can develop a number of policies in Europe.
Who is your counterpart? With whom are you negotiating? With the people or with the government?
No, with the civil society
president?
and at the same time with the government. And the civil society, you can help them. Why not, for example, giving free visa to Russian students, to Russian scientists? That needs to be done. But we have to be very tough towards the Russian government, towards Putin, because it's very clear that he is still a product of the Soviet Union and not of everything what happened after the fall of the Berlin Wall.
It's my fundamental point. Security should be there and Russia should be out. In order to get Donbass back into Ukraine, and I mean Ukrainian Donbass into Ukraine, and not create, again, a kind of great and big Transnistria.
Okay, so for now Minsk is dead?
Not at all.
You were speaking that people in the hall of the United Nations, representatives and governments, facilitated, planned and carried out atrocity. Who did you mean? Was it Russia? What's about Russia?
I have asked several times to the Security Council of the United Nations to refer this case to International Criminal Court, so that this International Criminal Court should make their legal and judicial judgment on this.
Whom? Russia?
No, I'm referring this Syrian case to ICC.
Nobody knows so much about international politics.
I have not talked about Russia. No.
Why?
Because they are a member of the Security Council. I have been expressing my concern about the division of the Security Council. where Russia is also part of the member.
When Russia began the major operations in Syria, it gave the US Air Force 1 hour to get out of the skies. That was how little they thought of them.
But again, I think we have to understand the difference between NATO's responsibility, which is to defend, protect all allies, and we are doing that, and we provide credible deterrence every day. We have seen no military attack against any NATO ally for almost 70 years. Then, of course, NATO is also concerned about what is going on outside, beyond our borders. All NATO allies participate in the coalition fighting ISIL. NATO, as an alliance, provide direct support to the alliance fighting ISIL with our AWACS surveillance planes.
In Aleppo, we are doing our utmost efforts. United States and Russia, they are also working very hard, even though
Russia is working hard
at
for
this
peace?
time. Their relationship has been a little bit sensitive now. I have urged Secretary Kerry and the Russian side to restore this cessation of hostilities so that we can deliver life-saving humanitarian assistance. We have been delivering minimum and at average more than 5 million people who are in besieged areas and hard-to-reach areas. And we have airdropped to at least more than 1 million people.
Look, I'm listening.
We are doing our utmost effort under such a very, very difficult situation.
The most senior human rights official in the United Nations, the Commissioner, High Commissioner for Human Rights, has accused your forces of war crimes in Syria. Do you care what he thinks?
Well, first of all, I would like to say that the situation in Syria is very worrisome. And you know that from the beginning, Russian Federation was one of the countries who struggle for political and peaceful solution.
I understand that, but I'm talking about war crimes. That's
no
the,
war
that's
crimes,
the accusation.
Yes. Do you care about the accusation? Of course, we care about everything, but at the same time, you should know what we are doing in Syria and what was the policy of the Russian Federation. As I said, first of all, we launched the political process, and Geneva process was a result of Russian efforts, and you should admit it. And we did a lot to stop the war in Syria. You know that we play a critical role in withdrawing of all chemical weapons from Syria.
I understand that, but you're accused of indiscriminate airstrikes across the eastern part of Aleppo. You're accused of indiscriminate airstrikes across Aleppo by government forces and their allies, which are you, are responsible for the overwhelming majority of civilian casualties. I'm asking you to address that point.
I'm asking...
Which comes from the most senior official, human rights official of the United Nations.
First of all, I would like to refer to the actions that were taken by the Russian Federation quite recently. For 3 days, there was a ceasefire established by the Russian armed forces with a view to allow people to leave Aleppo, eastern Aleppo. And you know, by the way, that in western part of the city, the overall amount of population is more than 1 million. And they suffered very much from assaults from the terrorist groupings, Jabhat al-Nusra and others.
I understand, but you don't want to address these charges, do you? The British Prime Minister, Theresa May, said last week, it's vital we work together to continue to put pressure on Russia to stop its appalling, its sickening atrocities in Syria. German Chancellor Angela Merkel, what is happening with Russian support in Aleppo is completely inhuman. You don't answer these charges.
I'm answering your question by saying that what we are doing in Syria, first of all, we are promoting peaceful process, political process, and we encourage the Mistura to re-engage in political discussions about the future of Syria. And secondly, we are fighting Daesh. To fight Daesh, this is fully in accordance with international law.
And bombing the civilian population back into the Stone Age.
We are not bombing civilian populations.
Categorically?
I am not talking categorically. Of course, maybe there is collateral damage.
Is the UN an alibi? Are you, as a Secretary General, were you an alibi for those who didn't respect human rights, who killed people, who didn't respect the needs of the refugees?
We are the first responders always, and helper and rescuers of those people who are in need of support. We are trying to provide life-saving support, whether it is a humanitarian or any security protection. I am conscious of sometimes lack of support, such kind of thing, or as a speedy, as effective response to that. But you should also understand the circumstantial difficulties, lack of political will on the part of member states. There are a lot of political blocks which make our work very difficult. I'm urging member states to fully abide by human rights principles and values of the United Nations. After all, United Nations exists for the people. We are serving the peoples around the world.